Hello, Nancy Drew fans, and welcome back to another book to game comparison video. And really, I should be calling this a book to games, so plural, comparison video, because I am looking at Secrets Can Kill Remastered. And being a remastered game, I thought I should also look at the original version of the game. So I'm going to be looking at three different stories today. And to be completely honest, I haven't gone back to reread the book that it's based off of. I'm taking a lot from my original comparison video. Tried to change the dialogue and text a little bit, but a lot of it I didn't felt needed a reread. But I might not be quite as detailed as I was in the original, just so you're all prepared for that. So speaking of which, let's look at the book that we're going to be looking at. This is Secrets Can Kill. It's published in 1986, so this is the first thing I'm going to be looking at. I'll then look at the original computer game from 1998, also called Secrets Can Kill. And then finally looking at the remastered version from 2010, Secrets Can Kill. So those are the three things that I'm going to be looking at today. And I'm looking forward to doing this. I really debated whether or not it was worth doing a second comparison video, but I thought it would be quite interesting to compare not just the remastered game with its source material, so with the book, but even with the original game, because there are differences and there are things that the remastered game took from the book that the original game did not. So I really wanted to point those out and thought that might actually interest people. So let's go do that. So we're going to start, of course, with the book. This is the first book from the Nancy Drew Files series. It is, of course, entitled Secrets Can Kill. So, as I noted earlier, I've taken a lot from the original comparison video I did that includes a lot of the text. So if you watched the other video, I apologize, this might be a little dry, this slide in particular. So what we have is Nancy's been invited by the principal of Bedford High School to come to nearby Bedford, so it's a town near River Heights, to look for a thief. So he's noticed that some things have gone missing at the school, and he would like Nancy to basically find out who's responsible. And she has a few suspects, and they're all students. The first is Daryl Gray, who is actually her point of contact in the book. The principal thought it would be a good idea for her not to go talking to him all the time. That's going to seem weird as this new student, because she's there undercover, I should note. It makes more sense for her to talk to a student who sort of knows the lay of the land very well, and Daryl's the perfect student for that, given that he's the student body president, and he's also popular, so he knows a lot of people. He's sort of a good in for Nancy. The other students she talks to are Walt Hunk Hogan. He's a star football player. Carla Dalton, who is a cheerleader, and she and Nancy don't get on very well. They have trouble right off the bat. Hal Morgan, who is just a very smart student. His priorities tend to be his academics as well as running for student council president or student body president. And Connie Watson, who is a rather shy student. And then Jake Webb, who Nancy doesn't quite feel great about. He's not very nice. Well, let's put it that way. And so Nancy's investigating, and she has a couple of reasons for sort of honing in on Jake Webb as being the person behind the thefts at the school. Partly because he has access to a lot of information, and also because of a warning that Nancy received before she even got to Bedford, and she can kind of tie it back to Jake just in terms of his interests. But what winds up happening is he gets murdered. So we have this huge shift in the story. Nancy's not just looking for a thief. She thinks she's found her thief, but now she has to figure out who killed her thief. So she's now got this second mystery to solve. It becomes quite intense. And a note I threw in there originally and thought I'd keep is that Brenda Carlton, who for the players of the games are familiar with from the 25th Nancy Drew game, she is a regular character in the Files series, and we do see her in the very first book of the series, and she makes a couple of appearances and makes some trouble. Not intentionally, but that's sort of her way. So as far as the book continues to go, Nancy figures out that the person responsible for Jake's murder is not one of her original suspects. It's not a student, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. She also learns that Jake was not the only thief. But again, we'll get to that. So now let's look at the original computer game version of this story. So it was the first one that her Interactive released for their Nancy Drew line. And as noted before, it's called Secrets Can Kill. So Nancy's Aunt Eloise is the one who invites her to help solve a case at a high school, but rather than being in Bedford, it's in Florida, community called Paseo del Mar. And rather than looking into theft, she's looking into a murder right away. So an intense first game. Let's say that. And her contacts are students. So we've got Daryl Gray again, student body president. He knows that Nancy's a detective. Then we have Hector Hulk Sanchez, star football player who's dealing with an injury. Hal Tanaka, who is a student who is under a lot of pressure to do well and get into post-secondary education. And Connie Watson, an athletic female who is short on money often and has a bunch of secrets of her own. Well, they all do, and we'll get to those. And a big point of this game is that Nancy's only ever solving one mystery. So again, there's no theft that she's looking into. It's solely the murder of Jake Rogers. And much like the book, what Nancy uncovers is that the students, although they have their problematic relationships, we'll call it that, with Jake, they're not responsible for his death. It is a gentleman named, spoiler alert, Mitch Dillon. And again, we'll talk more about that when I talk about the endings. So there's our first version of the game. Now we'll look at the remastered version. So this was released in 2010, and as we'll see, very, very similar to the first game that was put out. So in this story, Nancy's Aunt Eloise asks her to come down to Paseo del Mar in Florida to solve a murder at the local high school. Sounds familiar. And her contacts are a little different. She has not just the classmates of the victim, so again, that's Jake Rogers. He's our same victim, but she's also in contact with a detective. And I should note he's an undercover detective named Detective Beach, and she refers to him as Uncle Steve when they're meeting up so that people don't know that she's talking to someone in law enforcement. And then, of course, we have Daryl Gray, still student body president, but he does not know that she's a detective. Detective Beach is her point of contact in this version, so there's a bit more kept secret from the students in this one. And we have Hector the Hulk Sanchez, so still the star player of the football team. Hal Tanaka, same sort of story. He has his pressures academically, trying to do well. And Connie Watson, slightly different role. We don't talk so much about trouble with money. She is still athletic, but she's also a school monitor, which is sort of a nice addition to her character. And Nancy winds up uncovering all these secrets that each student has with Jake. But again, just like with the original version of the game, none of them are responsible for his death. Rather, that's on the hands of Mitch Dillon and Detective Beach. What we learn is that our so-called detective or point of contact is not actually a police officer. He's a criminal, and we don't actually know who he is. And I'll, again, talk more about that later on. But that sort of sums up our three stories, and now let's do the comparison between the three. And this is really the whole point of doing this, with me choosing to do this second comparison video, because I really wanted to pinpoint what's changed and kept the same, and how it's not consistent between the two games with the book. Our title, of course, stays the same. I said that a bunch. Secrets can kill, and secrets can kill. Our storylines are also very similar. So for the book, Nancy initially goes undercover to uncover a thief. We could also add, and then try to solve a murder. For both of the games, Nancy seeks out a murder. That's why she's been invited into this story. For our location, they're both set at high schools, but in different parts of the country. So the book is set at Bedford High in Bedford, near River Heights, whereas for the games, they are set at Paseo del Mar High, which is in Paseo del Mar, Florida. So again, different parts of the country, but essentially our setting is the same. Next, I'll just quickly go over the names. So this will be familiar for those who watched the original video. We just have a couple differences. So our first one is with Jake. His last name is different between the book and both games. His last name remains as Rogers for both versions of the game. In the book, it was Webb. So, small change. Then we have Walt Hunk Hogan, or Hector Hulk the Hulk Sanchez. So, slightly different for all three. Different first name, certainly. Walt in the book, Hector for both games. His nickname in the book is Hunk, whereas in the games it's Hulk or the Hulk, the having been added for the remastered version. And then Hal's last name also changes from Morgan to Tanaka. So Morgan just for the book, Tanaka for both of the games. And now let's dive into each of the characters individually and really dissect what's going on there with them. So we'll start with Jake, who is ultimately our victim. But in the book, he starts out as a thief and is also a blackmailer. And then he winds up murdered. So that's not great. But in the games, both versions, his only act of thievery, because he's not actually being investigated as a thief, is that he stole Detective Beach's journal. Sorry, I know I said both games. I meant just in the remastered version. He stole Detective Beach's journal. In the original game, there's, as far as I noted, there's no thievery involved. So that's a little different between the three. Then we can look at Walter Hector. So this is an athlete who's been injured while playing football. In the book, he's hiding the injury. So his teammates, his classmates, they don't know that he has this going on. Whereas in the games, in addition to having this injury, which people know about, he's stolen steroids to try to deal with the pain. So in the first game, I just made note of the pharmacies. It's Vandalay Pharmaceuticals, who he steals from. In the remastered version, it's the Drug Station Pharmacy. Why they changed the name, I don't know. But they did. Seems unnecessary. So, yeah, there we go. But other than that, the character of Walt or Hector is the same. Hal is in many ways the same between book and games, but not quite. His motivations are a little different. So for all three stories, he's really considered sort of a brainiac. He's very smart and he's really focused on academics. And in both, Jake catches him cheating. In the book, Jake catches him stealing SATs. So this is, to give him an edge. And Nancy also sees him copying a test she's taking. Remember, she's undercover. She has to take tests just like everybody else. And she sees Hal looking over at her paper. In the games, Jake films Hal copying an essay. So the type of cheating is a little bit different. And then, as I know before, the motivation's different. So in the book, Hal is not only just very into his academics, that's important to him, but he's also running for class president, and he's just run out of time. He can't cope with the load of work, and that's why he's cheating. Whereas in both of the games, there are family pressures, and he really wants to do well for his family. He really wants to get into med school, and he just can't handle the workload. It's too much, so he cheats to copy the essay because he doesn't have the time to, create his own essay. So there's where we have a bit of a difference, but ultimately it's the same fact of Hal cheating. And then we'll look at Connie. So in the book, she's quite timid, and she would like to be a cheerleader, but she's not really an athlete, and she doesn't get along with the other cheerleaders. They're quite mean to her. And she is also a thief. So as I noted, Jake is responsible for some of the thievery that the principal at Bedford High was aware of, but he's not the only one. Connie also steals, and Jake catches her stealing jewelry. In the original game, she's a bit more athletic. Really, she's an athlete in both stories. But in the original game, we see her just being a little bit more forthcoming, I guess, with her athleticism. She's often at the gym. We know this just as background. We don't see her physically there. And we can take that from the character of Carla Dalton, who was not added in the game. She sort of merged with the character of Connie, these two characters from the book. And with Connie, she also disguises herself in this men's judo tournament, and she winds up being the winner. And there's a little difference between why she does this, and I'll get to that in a second. I just wanted to continue with sort of her role. So we know she's very, very athletic in the original game, and it's not really hidden in the revised version, but she's also a school monitor. So I feel like that part of her background isn't as obvious in the retelling of the game. And just going back to sort of that motivation about the judo tournament, in the original game, there's both a women's and a men's tournament, but the prize money is different. It's more in the men's competition, which is why she entered it. In the remastered version, there's no women's competition, so that's why she's entered. She's good at the sport and she wants to win the prize money, but she doesn't even have a chance to compete as a woman. So that's a little different between the two games, and that background for Connie's motivation. And I just thought that was really interesting that her interactive made that change. But again, ultimately her character between both games is the same, but she is fairly different as far as her character in the book, because her character from the book is more timid, but merged with the character of Carla Dalton. So next, let's look at Daryl, our second last character here. So he's a former rich kid, and he is currently the class president. In the book and the original version of the game, here's where things get a little tricky. So in the book and the original version of her interactive game, he is Nancy's contact. In the revised version, the remastered game, he's not her contact. He doesn't even know that she's investigating Jake's death. He doesn't know she's a detective. She does sort of tell him straight up if you choose for her to do that, and he thinks it's a joke. But yeah, that's actually kept secret. So there's one difference. And then in the book and the remastered version of the game, Daryl is selling government secrets. Whereas in the original game, her interactive changed that. They changed that part of his storyline and made him a drug runner. So there's another difference between the two games. And then, of course, in both games, he found Jake. That at least has stayed the same. But yes, very small details of Daryl changed between the three mediums, and it's sort of hard to keep track. But this was one of those things I knew right off the bat I wanted to point out. So I remember when I first read the book, or rather when I read the book to do the first comparison quite some time ago, I picked up on the selling of government secrets right away and thought, oh, well, her interactive went back to that when they remastered the game. And this is actually really the reason I considered doing another comparison video. So just wanted to make note of that. And with that, let's move on to our last character. We could say there's actually two, but Mitch Dillon, I'm not bothering to make a thing about him. So we're going to look at Detective Beach. So he's a new character. He's not in the book. He's not in the first version of the game. He was created for the remastered game. So he is supposedly an undercover police officer, and he serves as Nancy's point of contact for the investigation. So he's taking over that role that Daryl had in the book and the original game. And we learn that in reality, he, along with Mitch Dillon, are criminals. So he used Nancy to try to track down a journal of his that Jake found. So I've noted before that Jake's bit of theft is only in the revised version of the game, and it was because he found this notebook. And so we could say he stole it. And going back to Detective Beach, we don't actually know his true identity. So an entirely new character for the remastered game, which made it a little bit more interesting, gave us something new to play with. And, well, someone new to interact with. So the last thing I'm going to go over are the endings, and they do vary quite a bit between the three stories. So I'll start with the book. The takedown happens at a public park after school, and we have quite a few people present. We've got Daryl, Nancy, Bess, this fellow named Alan who is dating Bess, and we have George and Ned. So the whole squad's there, as well as Brenda Carlton, who of course shows up and nearly ruins their plan, which is typical of Brenda if you've read the Case Files books. But ultimately they get their man. They take down Mitch, and things are all good from there. And then we'll look at the first rendition of the game. So the meeting is not at a park. It's at Vandalay Pharmaceuticals. initially with just Daryl and Nancy, and Mitch is coming for a meetup, and then eventually Connie also shows up and sort of saves everybody. And in both of those versions, so the book and the first of the games, Mitch is the one who's confronted, and Daryl gets shot in the arm. Just a side note. A little different with the remastered game. The confrontation is with Detective Beach, so we don't ever see Mitch Dillon. And Detective Beach confronts Nancy at Aunt Eloise's house, so we have a different location yet again. And she winds up tricking him into getting caged when he tries to access the safe. So that's all a little weird. One of the things I was expecting with the gameplay of the remastered version was for a confrontation with Mitch, and I thought we were going to see Mitch Dillon. Instead we got Detective Beach, so that I thought was an interesting choice. So to conclude, the 1998 and 2010 games, both of them, they're both fabulous retellings of the 1986 book. They both stuck really strongly to the source material, and they cut out material that wasn't necessary. This is mostly the character of Carla Dalton, and even Brenda. She wasn't that necessary. And then merging elements that made for a more interesting character, and that goes back to Carla, having been merged with Connie to create the Connie we know from both of the games. The remastered version also included a newly created suspect, and then interwove details from her Interactive's previous and upcoming games in a wonderful way. So there are all those little bits of detail that we see that make references to past Her Interactive games, and as well as for the Captive Curse, which was going to be an upcoming game, we also see references to the book series. It's just really great, all these little details that were added. And so by releasing Secrets Can Kill with these changes, this character of Nancy Drew, who's been around for decades, she and her many stories, both books and games, are really celebrated and appreciated on a special level. So there we are, everyone. That is my book to games comparison for Secrets Can Kill, and Secrets Can Kill. So a lot of things did stay the same, but I did pick out a couple differences between the two games, which I thought was interesting. Particularly, again, that aspect of Daryl trading government secrets, which was taken from the book and put in the remastered game, but wasn't in the original game. So I thought that was interesting. And the big thing I'd anticipated when I knew this game was being remastered was Mitch Dillon again. I mentioned it just a little bit ago. I expected to see him. I expected our confrontation to be with a suspect who we actually interacted with, which we did. It was Detective Beach, and so I kind of figured out he had to be our bad guy. But I did think it really interesting that Her Interactive didn't make it Mitch Dillon. I'm curious as to why. I really wish I knew, because he's still a bad guy in all versions of the story. So why wasn't he made into a physical character who Nancy got to meet? Maybe they thought his role, working in HVAC, just wasn't going to work, but they could have made him the detective. I mean, they took Detective Beach, for those who don't know. At the end of the original version of the game, you see Nancy sort of driving off, and there is a billboard advertising a show. I believe it's a show called Detective Beach. So they're paying homage to that small element from the original Secrets Can Kill game. So I get where they took that name from, but I'm still sort of not bothered, but disappointed, I guess, that we didn't interact with Mitch Dillon beyond him making one phone call to Nancy. But there we go. I'll leave it at that. That is my comparison for these three versions of the same story. I hope you guys learned a little bit more and found the changes between the games and their relationship to the book as interesting as I did. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.